Hello, this is Dave Franz. Today I'd like to discuss managing the backup and restore functionality within System Manager. With these functions, we can backup and restore all configuration data from not only our system managers, but also for all session manager instances within our enterprise. All of the configuration data for the entire system is kept centrally on System Manager. So that means that we don't have to schedule individual backups of each session manager instance. They're all done through System Manager at the same time. Also, after a restore functionality, all the restored configuration data is automatically propagated to each of the session manager instances. So let's take a look at how we do a backup and restore. We first start by logging into our System Manager. Once we log in, we're faced with the dashboard screen with the three panels. On the right, under the Services panel, you'll see the Backup and Restore. Click on the Backup and Restore, and it will show us all of the backups and restorations that we have done on our system. It will give us the information whether it was a backup or restore, name of the file that we gave it when we did the backup, the path, the place that it put the backup, whatever it happens to be, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. The status, whether it was successful or not, whether it's pending, whether it failed, any description on that, when we performed the last backup, or any of these backups, whether it was a local backup or a remote backup, and also the login of the user that enabled that backup. So from any of these, we may click the individual backup files and get more information, but we'll see that in just a minute. To start a backup, we'll click on the Backup button on the upper left. By clicking on this, it takes us to the backup screen. The backup screen only asks for a very limited amount of information. We can choose the type of backup, whether it's local or remote. A local backup means that we are going to back up the files, again, all our system manager and session manager information, all configuration data is going to be backed up on a local backup to the local drive of the system manager. A remote backup we can actually use to back up the information to an off-site or an off-server location. The next information we need to provide is either a URL for this file or just the plain file name. If we identify just the file name in this space, it will back up here, back up locally on this system manager, and it will back up and put this file name in the default directory, and we'll see that default directory here in just a minute. So let's call this another backup. And there are certain requirements with regard to naming conventions with the file. There are certain things you cannot use, such as spaces and dashes and periods and such, any alphanumeric information. The rest of it is okay. So we'll call this another backup. And now we have the choice of either scheduling this backup for a later time or executing the backup now. I'll go ahead and click now to execute this backup. And you'll see it said as I clicked on it that the operation was in progress. It takes us back to the backup and restore page. And you'll see under our status that it shows that we have a backup running. This will occur, and we'll see this running status until the backup has been resolved, either if it's successful or if it failed. We can get an update on the progress of any of our backups by clicking on the refresh button up above the operation column. Click on the refresh and it refreshes the page. And you'll see it's still running. It may take a few minutes to run a backup. You'll see also the names that we have here. We identified this as another backup. It shows that name, another backup. It also appends the date and the time that this backup was first kicked off. So today's date and the time, hours, minutes, and seconds that this operation took place. Now you see I clicked the refresh and we see that our status was a success. So we know that the backup occurred and it was a successful backup. What if I wanted to do a backup and back it up into another location? So we click on backup again, and now we click on remote. You'll see now that it's asking for more information. We need to provide not just a file name, as we see down here, but we need to provide an actual IP address for the server that's going to store this information. We need to provide the port number. We need to provide a login and password that the system will use to log into that server in order to be able to save this information. Also off to the right here, you're going to see a little checkbox that says use default. Well, what's the default? What is the default information? If I click use default, what does that mean? That means that in the system we can set up a default location for our backups and our restores, as well as default information for a number of other systems. Let's see where that information is. So if I go up to, again, our home tab to get to the main dashboard again, I can go under the services column, go to configurations, and under configurations, click on settings. Now, under the settings file, we will see System Manager, or SMGR as it's abbreviated. By clicking on that, we'll see that we can click on SMGR Element Manager. SMGR Element Manager is the System Manager container, if you will, for all of our default information when it comes to saving files, restoring files, disk space that's being allocated, how many backup files we can have at any one time, how long we're going to retain those files, what's the maximum file size, and so forth. So here's where we can specify the default information if we wanted to. Down below we'll see the remote server port, the remote server user information. Once all of this information is filled out, we can click Done, and we then would have that default information stored. So then under Backup and Restore, if we clicked Use Default, it would use that information that we have stored on that screen. If we don't want to use that default information, we can use and fill this information out individually for every single backup we do if we want to. Now that we've actually backed up a file, and we can back it up either, again, remotely or locally, what if I want to schedule a backup to occur at a future time? Again, by clicking on Backup, I can click on the file name that I want to give these backups, and we'll call this Future Backup. When I click on Schedule, I am taken to the Schedule Backup screen. On the Schedule Backup screen, I need to tell the system when I want this backup to be scheduled. First off, I have to give it a job name. I can call this job name anything I want. I can provide it specific names for specific types of backups. I can just call it Fred if I want to. And then I go ahead and identify when I want this backup to occur. Now you can see that we can actually have this as a recurring backup, meaning that I can have it backed up, say, every day, every night, daily, for as long as I care. I can specify that there's no end date. I can specify that I want it to occur X number of times, or I can specify an actual date by which I want this to stop. Or I can just say, I just want to execute this just this one time, and I just want it done at this particular time. So we'll say right now I want it done a couple of minutes in advance. I click on the commit button, and it takes us back to the backup and restore. Now you'll notice that we have identified a future backup. I call it future backup, and the status of it now is planned, meaning that it's not running, it isn't a success, it isn't a failure, it's planned for the future. And I can identify then when I can look at this file and then identify when they're actually planned. And when it actually occurs, this status, if I do a refresh, will update to tell me if it's actually running and whether it was a success or not. So I can schedule my backups to occur, say at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning at a period of slack time. And then the next morning when I come in, I can take a look to see whether or not my backups actually occurred and if they were successful. And if they're not successful, if there's a failure, I can then explore to see why. And I can look at any of these backups that I have identified. Let's say the initial default backup. I click on that. I can view the log file on that particular backup. This log file tells me what it backed up, when it started the backup. You'll see here it says Backup Manager starting the backup, the time and the date that it was actually backed up. And then it will take me through everything that it is backing up, identifying all the components within the system, all the data that it is attempting to back up, culminating at the very end with hopefully a file that says that the backup was created. And you'll see here that the backup archive file was created when it was created. And here above it says it has completed successfully. So I can take a look at this log. If I had a failure on a backup, I could look at this log and identify what failed. It'll tell me why it failed, and it will tell me at what point it failed in trying to do the backup. Now I can also schedule, just as we saw with a backup and restore, we just saw being able to create a backup at a particular time and date. I can also do a scheduled backup off-site. So I can say that I would like to have backups scheduled every morning at 1 o'clock, and once a week I want a backup scheduled at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, whenever, to go to a remote site and store it every day locally, but once a week or once a month or whenever, get it stored off-site on another server. When we restore information, when we're trying to restore from a previous backup, we can click on that backup that we want to restore, and we would then be able to do a restore. When we do the restore, it's going to, when it finishes, when it's successful, it'll come back and say that it provided it did a restore operation. It will tell us when it did the restore and where it restored it from, and again, the status as a success. Now, when you do a restore, and we will finish with this in just a minute, when I decide that I want to restore a file from the previous backup, I can click on the restore button, and it's then going to ask me what file do I want to restore? What backup did I create that I want to restore from? And the drop-down box will give me a list of the various different backup files that it has. And again, my choices here are whether I want a local or remote. So if I've stored the file remotely, I can then restore it remotely. But I will click a file here, and it tells me this is the file name that it's going to restore. And by clicking on the restore, it will now go through and actually restore the configuration data from that backup file. It's important to know that this could take a period of time. By clicking on this restore, it tells us this could take up to 45 minutes, depending upon how much data we actually have in our system. If we want to continue, press the continue button. If we want to abort it, click the cancel button. If I click the continue button, it's going to then say, okay, operation is in progress. And within a few minutes or so, we'll see it will actually log us out of the system here and drop us out of System Manager. And we will have to wait for the system to finish restoring before we can log back into System Manager. Now, We need to understand a few things too. Backup and restore operations are mutually exclusive. You can't have one going on. You can't have a backup occurring while you're trying to restore, or try and restore while you have a backup occurring at a particular time. So if you have the system, if you tried to do a restore while a backup is occurring, the restore will fail, and vice versa. Also, it's important to note that all backups that we schedule within an hour after a restore operation are going to be skipped. So let's say, for instance, I have planned a backup, a daily backup at 2 in the morning. And for some reason, things are not going as planned and I need to do a restore just prior to that. So half hour early, I click on a restore. It will go ahead and restore data from whatever backup file I told it to restore from. But it will now skip that next backup because it's within that 1 hour time frame. This is done so that our new backup doesn't overwrite any earlier backup if a restore happens to fail. So again, if we click a restore, any subsequent backups that have been scheduled or attempted within an hour after that restore will be skipped, will be ignored. So this is a method of backing up and restoring all of your data, all of your configuration data for your entire enterprise. We back up and restore on System Manager, and that backs up all the instances within our enterprise. Now you'll see on our screen that it's dropped us out of System Manager here. We will have to log back in, but we won't be able to log in now because it's going through a restore, and it may take a few minutes to restore, again, depending on how much data we have. So thank you very much for spending these last few minutes with me. Hopefully this was a little bit enlightening with regards to backing up and restoring your data. And I look forward to talking with you again on a future endeavor. Thank you.